3 weeks before my dream wedding, I discovered my sister had secretly contacted Riverside Manor and convinced them I was a financial risk. She told them I couldn't afford the final payment and suggested they offer the date to someone more reliable. That someone turned out to be her best friend Madison, who coincidentally needed a last-minute venue for her own rushed ceremony. When I confronted Brianna, she shrugged and said she was protecting the family reputation from my inevitable embarrassment. What she didn't know was that I had been quietly managing the electrical accounts for her luxury rental properties for 2 years, and I had learned patience from watching her manipulate everyone around us. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning everything unraveled started like any other Tuesday in September. I was sitting at my desk in my Pearl District loft, coffee growing cold as I fine-tuned the final details for our October wedding. Tyler had already left for his shift at the hospital, kissing me goodbye with that gentle smile that still made my heart skip after 3 years together. The apartment felt peaceful in that early morning light filtering through the tall windows, casting soft shadows across my design workspace, where wedding invitation mock-ups were scattered between client projects. I was reviewing the final headcount when my phone buzzed with a call from Monica Sterling, our wedding planner. Her voice sounded strained, almost apologetic, which immediately set off alarm bells in my chest. Monica was the type of person who handled crises with military precision, so hearing uncertainty in her tone made my stomach clench. "Zoe, honey, I need you to sit down," she began, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "I just got off the phone with Miss Reeves at Riverside Manor, and there's been some kind of misunderstanding about your final payment." I frowned, pulling up my banking app on my laptop. "What kind of misunderstanding?" "I transferred the balance last Friday, just like we discussed. The confirmation email is right here in my inbox." Monica paused, and in that silence, I felt the first tremor of something going very wrong. "Mrs. Reeves says she received a call yesterday from someone claiming to be you, expressing concerns about the financial arrangement. This person suggested that you were having second thoughts about the venue cost and requested to cancel the booking." The words hit me like cold water. "Someone claiming to be me?" "Monica, I never made that call. I've been looking forward to this day for 8 months. Why would I cancel 3 weeks before the wedding?" That's what I told her, but apparently this person knew specific details about your booking. They mentioned your dress designer, the florist arrangements, even the specific menu selections you made during the tasting. Ms. Reeves was convinced it was legitimate. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through my emails, looking for any communication I might have missed. There was nothing unusual, just the standard vendor confirmations and timeline updates Monica had been sending weekly. Who else has access to those details? The vendor list includes me, you, Tyler, and anyone you might have shared the planning documents with, family members, bridesmaids, anyone who's been involved in the planning process, family member. The phrase echoed in my mind as a sick realization began forming. I thought about the group text where I'd been sharing updates, the planning binder I'd left at my parents' house during Sunday dinners, the excited conversations where details had been discussed openly. But only one person had shown unusual interest in every single vendor choice, asking pointed questions about costs and contracts. "Monica, what exactly did Mrs. Reeves say this person told her?" "They claimed you were concerned about overextending financially, and suggested that the venue should consider offering the date to someone who could better afford the full-service package. They even mentioned that they knew of another couple who would be interested in a last-minute booking." The pattern was becoming clear, and it felt like watching a car accident in slow motion. Did Mrs. Reeves mention who this other couple might be? Another pause. "Actually, yes. A Madison Chen and her fiancé. They apparently toured the venue yesterday afternoon and put down a deposit immediately. Madison Chen, Brianna's college roommate and current best friend, the same Madison who had been complaining for months about not being able to find an available venue for her December wedding. The same Madison who Brianna had been helping with wedding planning, often using my research and vendor recommendations as starting points for their own searches. I thanked Monica and promised to call her back after I sorted things out, but my mind was already racing ahead to the confrontation I knew was coming. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a coincidence. This was calculated, deliberate, and it had Brianna's fingerprints all over it. I tried calling Riverside Manor directly, hoping to speak with Mrs. Reeves and clear up what I still wanted to believe was some kind of elaborate miscommunication. The phone rang several times before her familiar voice answered, warm but cautious. Mrs. Reeves, this is Zoe Hartwell. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding about my wedding booking for October 15th. Oh, Miss Hartwell, she said, and I could hear the discomfort in her voice. I was hoping you would call. I have to admit, I was quite surprised by yesterday's conversation. It seemed so unlike the enthusiastic bride I met during your initial tour. That's because it wasn't me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I never called to cancel anything. Someone impersonated me, and I need to understand exactly what was said. Mrs. Reeves sighed deeply. The caller identified herself as Zoe Hartwell and had your booking reference number. She knew about your specific menu choices, the preferred setup for the ceremony space, even the playlist requests you'd submitted. When someone has that level of detail, we assume it's legitimate. What exactly did this person say about canceling? She expressed concerns about the financial commitment and suggested that perhaps a smaller, more intimate venue would be more appropriate for your budget. She was quite insistent that you didn't want to burden your family with an event you couldn't comfortably afford. The caller even mentioned that she knew of another couple who would be better suited for our full-service package. The manipulation was breathtaking in its precision. Whoever made that call had used my own insecurities about wedding costs, concerns I'd only shared in private family conversations, to make the cancellation seem authentic and considerate, rather than suspicious. Mrs. Reeves, I need you to understand that I never made that call. Someone used my personal information to sabotage my wedding, and I need to know if there's any way to reverse this. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Mrs. Reeves spoke, her voice heavy with regret. Miss Hartwell, I'm truly sorry, but we've already signed a new contract with the Chan party. They've paid their deposit and begun vendor coordination for the same date. From a legal standpoint, we can't break that agreement without facing significant penalties ourselves. I felt the ground shifting beneath me as the reality settled in. 3 weeks before my wedding, I was suddenly without a venue, and the legal complexities meant that even proving the cancellation was fraudulent wouldn't necessarily restore my booking. Miss Reeves offered to help me find alternative dates or recommend other venues, but we both knew that finding anything comparable with such short notice would be nearly impossible. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet apartment, staring out at the Portland skyline while my coffee grew completely cold. The logical part of my mind was already shifting into problem-solving mode, mentally reviewing backup options and calculating what it would take to salvage the situation. But underneath that practical planning, a deeper anger was building, not the explosive kind that leads to shouting matches, but the steady, methodical fury that comes from recognizing a pattern of behavior you've tolerated for too long. Brianna had always been competitive, even as children. She was 2 years older and had perfected the art of positioning herself as the helpful, protective sister, while subtly undermining my achievement. When I got accepted to art school, she convinced our parents it was impractical and expensive, then coincidentally decided to pursue a creative minor herself. When I started freelancing and built a steady client base, she launched her own lifestyle blog and borrowed heavily from my design aesthetic and business strategies. But this felt different. This wasn't just competition or sibling rivalry. This was deliberate sabotage of one of the most important days of my life, executed with careful planning and intimate knowledge of my vulnerability. The fact that she had used Madison as the beneficiary made it even more calculated, creating a situation where confronting her would be complicated by friendship dynamics and social pressure. I spent the next hour documenting everything I could remember about the planning process, trying to identify exactly when and how Brianna might have gathered the specific information used in the impersonation. The booking reference number was particularly concerning because it suggested she had either accessed my emails or somehow obtained information directly from Monica or one of the vendors. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler checking in about his evening schedule, and I realized I would have to tell him what had happened. The thought of explaining that our carefully planned wedding was suddenly in jeopardy because of my sister's interference made my chest tight with embarrassment and frustration. Tyler had been nothing but supportive throughout the planning process, even when I stressed about details he considered unimportant, and now I had to tell him that months of preparation had been undone by family drama. Before I could lose my nerve, I called him direct. Tyler answered on the second ring, his voice warm with the casual affection that had been one of the first things I'd fallen in love with. "Hey, beautiful. How's the planning going? Did Monica get back to you about the final timeline?" "Tyler, we need to talk. Something's happened with the venue." The shift in his tone was immediate. "What kind of something? Is there a problem with the date?" I took a deep breath and told him everything, from Monica's call to my conversation with Mrs. Reeves, to my growing certainty that Brianna was behind the whole situation. Tyler listened without interrupting, asking only a few clarifying questions about the timeline and the specific information that had been used in the impersonation. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Finally he spoke, his voice carrying a controlled anger that I rarely heard from him. "So your sister essentially stole our wedding date and gave it to her friend, and now we're supposed to just scramble to find something else while they get married at the venue we've been planning for months. That's about the size of it. And she did this by pretending to be you and using private information she only had access to because we trusted her with our plans." "Yeah." Tyler exhaled slowly, and I could picture him running his hand through his hair the way he did when he was processing something difficult. "Okay, first question is, what do you want to do about the venue situation? Do we postpone and try to find something comparable, or do we look for available alternatives for the same date?" His immediate shift to practical problem solving was exactly what I needed. Instead of getting lost in the emotional betrayal, Tyler was helping me focus on what we could control moving forward. "I think we should try to find something else for the same date. I don't want to postpone because of what she did. But Tyler, I need you to know that I'm not going to let this slide. What Brianna did isn't just about the venue, it's about deliberately sabotaging us and using manipulation tactics that she's been perfecting for years." "I'm with you," he said simply. "Whatever you decide to do about your sister, I support. Right now, let's focus on making sure we still have the wedding we want, just maybe in a different location." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began researching alternative venues with availability for our day. The options were limited, mostly because the good venues book months or even years in advance, but I found a few possibilities, including the Glass Conservatory, a smaller but elegant space downtown that specialized in intimate ceremony. As I was browsing their photo gallery, my phone rang with a call from my mother. Patricia Hartwell had always prided herself on being the family mediator, the one who smoothed over conflicts and maintained the appearance of harmony even when underlying tensions were obvious to everyone involved. "Zoe, sweetheart, I just heard from Brianna about some confusion with your wedding venue. She's very concerned and wanted me to call and see if there's anything we can do to help." The audacity was stunning. Brianna had apparently moved from sabotage directly to positioning herself as the concerned family member trying to help solve the crisis she had created. I could picture her at our parents' house, probably sitting at the kitchen island with that expression of worried innocence she had perfected in childhood whenever she needed to deflect blame. "Mom, there's no confusion." Brianna impersonated me and canceled my venue reservation, then arranged for Madison to take our date. "This wasn't a misunderstanding or an accident." "Oh honey, I'm sure there's been some kind of miscommunication. Brianna said the venue called her because they couldn't reach you about some payment issues, and she was just trying to help clarify the situation." The story was evolving in real time, shifting from helpful intervention to innocent miscommunication. I realized that Brianna had already begun damage control, creating a narrative that would make any accusations from me seem like overreaction or paranoia. "Mom, the venue never had payment issues. I have bank records showing the transfer went through exactly when it was supposed. Someone called them pretending to be me and convinced them I wanted to cancel, that someone had access to specific details about our planning that only family members would know. Well, even if that's true, I'm sure whoever did it thought they were helping. Maybe they were concerned about the financial strain and didn't realize how to approach it direct. The conversation continued in circles, with my mother deflecting every piece of evidence I presented and suggesting alternative explanations that grew increasingly implausible. It became clear that regardless of proof or logic, she was committed to maintaining family harmony by minimizing the seriousness of what had happened. After hanging up, I sat in the growing afternoon shadows of my apartment, feeling the familiar weight of family dynamics that prioritized peace over justice. This was the same pattern that had played out countless times throughout my childhood, where Brianna's actions were reframed as misunderstandings, and my reactions were characterized as oversensitive or dramatic, but this time felt different. This time, she had crossed a line that affected not just me but Tyler, our families, our friends, and dozens of vendors who had been working toward our October date. The ripple effects of her decision would impact people far beyond our immediate family, and the casual way she had dismissed those consequences revealed something about her character that I could no longer ignore or excuse. I opened a new document on my laptop and began keeping detailed records of every conversation, every revelation, every piece of evidence related to the venue cancellation. If this was going to escalate, and I suspected it would, I wanted to have a clear timeline and documentation of exactly what had happened and when. The rest of the afternoon was spent researching legal options for venue disputes and fraud, exploring backup wedding locations, and beginning the complex process of potentially notifying vendors about possible changes to our plan. Each task felt like building a foundation for whatever would come next, creating stability in a situation that had been deliberately destabilized. As evening approached, I realized that tomorrow would bring new challenges and revelations, but tonight I wanted to focus on the life Tyler and I were building together, regardless of the obstacles others might place in our path. The wedding was important, but it was ultimately just one day in what we hoped would be a long and happy marriage. I was learning that sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones you choose to fight, but the ones you choose to fight strategically, with patience and documentation rather than emotion and impulse. Brianna had made her move, calculating that I would either accept the situation quietly or react emotionally in ways that would make me look unreasonable. She was wrong on both counts, but she wouldn't realize that until it was too late to change course. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call from Kelsey Chang, my college friend who worked as an event coordinator at several high-end venues around Portland. We hadn't spoken in a few weeks, but her voice carried an urgency that immediately caught my attention. "Zoe, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how you're going to take it. I was working an event at Riverside Manor yesterday when I overheard Mrs. Reeves talking to her assistant about a last-minute booking change. She mentioned your name, and when I heard the details, something didn't sit right with me." I settled into my kitchen chair, coffee mug in hand, preparing for whatever revelation was coming. "What kind of details?" "Well, apparently someone called claiming to be you, but Miss Reeves kept mentioning how different you sounded from when she'd spoken to you before. She said the caller seemed to have a different speech pattern and kept using phrases that didn't match how you normally communicate, but the caller knew so many specific details about your booking that Miss Reeves felt she had to take it seriously." This was the first concrete evidence that the venue staff had actually noticed inconsistencies in the impersonation. "Did she say anything else about the call?" "Here's the thing that really bothered me."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Mrs. Reeves mentioned that the caller specifically pushed for Madison Chen to get the date, saying she knew Madison personally and could vouch for her reliability. That level of advocacy for a replacement bride seemed strange for someone who was supposedly just canceling their own wedding. The pieces were falling into place with disturbing clarity. Not only had Brianna impersonated me to cancel the venue, but she had actively promoted Madison as the replacement, creating a situation that benefited her friend while causing maximum disruption to my plans. "Kelsey, did you happen to see Madison and her fiancé when they toured the venue?" "Actually, Yes. And here's what struck me as odd. Madison kept referring to someone named Brianna who had given her detailed information about the venue layout, the preferred vendors, and even specific menu recommendations. She mentioned that this Brianna person had been incredibly helpful in preparing her for the tour and had assured her that the venue would be available. The premeditation was becoming undeniable. Brianna hadn't just impersonated me impulsively. She had been planning this for some time, feeding Madison information about Riverside Manor and positioning her to take advantage of the opening that Brianna was planning to create. After thanking Kelsey for the information, I spent the morning following up on venue alternatives. The Glass Conservatory had availability for our date, and while it was smaller than Riverside Manor, the intimate setting actually appealed to both Tyler and me. The venue coordinator, Elena Rodriguez, was understanding about our situation and offered to expedite the booking process to accommodate our timeline. During my conversation with Elena, I mentioned that we were dealing with a venue cancellation due to fraudulent impersonation. Her response surprised me with its immediate concern and professionalism. "Mr. Hartwell, I have to tell you that this isn't the first time we've heard about someone impersonating a bride to manipulate venue booking. It's becoming a disturbing trend, and we've actually implemented additional verification procedures because of incidents like this. Would you be willing to provide us with documentation of what happened? We're working with other venues to develop better protection protocol." This conversation opened my eyes to the broader implications of what Brianna had done. Her actions weren't just affecting Tyler and me. They were part of a larger pattern of behavior that was causing problems for venue operators and other couples throughout the wedding industry. Elena connected me with Richard Voss, an attorney who specialized in contract disputes and fraud cases related to the events industry. Richard's office was located downtown, and I was able to schedule a consultation for that afternoon. Richard was a methodical man in his 50s who listened carefully as I explained the situation, occasionally asking clarifying questions about the timeline and the specific information that had been used in the impersonation. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and tapped his pen against his notepad. "Ms. Hartwell, what you've described constitutes several potential legal violations, including identity theft, fraud, and interference with contractual relationships. The fact that the impersonation was done by a family member who had access to your personal information doesn't make it less serious from a legal standpoint. What are my options for addressing this?" "Well, you could pursue civil action against your sister for damages related to the venue cancellation and the costs associated with finding alternative arrangements. You could also file a police report for identity theft, though prosecution would depend on the district attorney's office and their assessment of the case's merit." Richard explained that the documentation I had been gathering would be crucial for either approach, and he recommended that I continue building a comprehensive record of all communications and financial impacts related to the incident. "There's another aspect to consider," he added. "If your sister has done this type of thing before, there may be a pattern of behavior that strengthens your case. Identity theft and fraud often escalate over time, particularly when the perpetrator feels they've gotten away with previous incidents." This comment triggered a memory that sent a chill down my spine. 2 years ago, when I was applying for a new credit card to help manage some business expenses, I had been denied due to what the bank called inconsistent financial information on my application. At the time, I had assumed it was a clerical error and had applied elsewhere successfully, but now I wondered if there had been other attempts to manipulate my financial accounts or credit standing. That evening, I decided to pull my credit reports from all 3 major bureaus to see if there were any suspicious activities I had missed. The reports revealed several inquiries I didn't recognize, including applications for store credit cards and a small personal loan that had been submitted but not completed. All of these inquiries had occurred during periods when Brianna had been staying at my apartment, or when I had been traveling and she had offered to collect my mail. The pattern was becoming clear and disturbing. The venue cancellation wasn't an isolated incident, but rather the latest escalation in what appeared to be ongoing financial manipulation and identity misuse. I called Richard's office the next morning and scheduled a follow-up appointment to discuss these additional findings. He recommended that I file a comprehensive identity theft report with the Federal Trade Commission and begin the process of placing fraud alerts on all of my financial accounts. Meanwhile, I was also dealing with the practical aspects of planning a wedding with 3 weeks' notice at a new venue. Alina at the Glass Conservatory was incredibly helpful, connecting me with vendors who had experience working in their space and could accommodate our timeline. Surprisingly, many of the vendors we had already booked were flexible about the location change, and some even offered discounts to help offset the additional costs we were incurring due to the venue switch. Our florist, Maria Santos, was particularly supportive when I explained what had happened. Zoe, in 20 years of wedding planning, I've seen family drama cause more problems than any other single factor. The fact that you're handling this with such grace and practical thinking tells me you're going to have a beautiful wedding regardless of what your sister tried to do. Tyler and I spent that weekend touring the Glass Conservatory and meeting with vendors to finalize details for the new location. The space was different from Riverside Manor but had its own charm, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a garden courtyard that would be perfect for our October ceremony. By Sunday evening, we had successfully transferred our wedding to the new venue and felt confident that the day would be everything we had envisioned. But even as we solved the immediate crisis, I couldn't shake the feeling that Brianna's actions required a more substantial response. The identity theft investigation was proceeding through official channels, but I was beginning to understand that there were other aspects of her behavior that needed to be addressed. It was during a conversation with Tyler that I remembered something significant about Brianna's living situation. For the past 2 years, she had been managing several luxury rental properties as part of her real estate business. These properties were marketed as high-end short-term rentals for business travelers and wealthy tourists, and Brianna had built her lifestyle brand, partly around showcasing these elegant spaces on social media. What Tyler reminded me of was that when Brianna had first started managing these properties, she had asked me to help her set up utility accounts and service arrangements, because my credit score was better than hers at the time. I had agreed to help my sister get started in her business, and over time she had gradually taken over most of the account management responsibilities. However, several of the utility accounts were still in my name, with Brianna listed as an authorized user. This arrangement had worked smoothly for 2 years, with Brianna managing the day-to-day operations and ensuring that all bills were paid on time. I received monthly statements but rarely needed to intervene in the account management, since everything seemed to be running efficiently. But now, in light of what I had discovered about her willingness to use my identity for her own purposes, this arrangement took on a different significance. I realized that I had substantial control over the infrastructure that supported her most lucrative business operations, and more importantly, I had every legal right to manage those accounts as I saw fit since they were in my name. The idea that began forming wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense, it was about accountability and natural consequences. Brianna had used my identity to sabotage my wedding because she felt she could act without facing any meaningful repercussions. She had calculated that I would either accept the situation quietly or react emotionally in ways that would make me look unreasonable to our family and social circle. But she had made her calculations based on an incomplete understanding of the resources and options available to me. Just as she had access to information about my wedding planning, I had access to information about her business operations, and unlike her use of my identity, my management of accounts that were legitimately in my name was entirely legal and appropriate. I spent several days researching the utility arrangements for Brianna's rental properties, reviewing account statements, and understanding the payment schedules and service requirements for each location. The properties were indeed high-end, with monthly utility costs that reflected their luxury amenities and prime locations. What I discovered was that Brianna's business model depended heavily on maintaining the upscale image of these properties. Her social media presence showcased the elegant interiors, the scenic views, and the high-end amenities that justified the premium rental rates she charged. Any disruption to the utilities or services would not only affect her current bookings, but could damage her reputation and online reviews in ways that would have lasting impact on her business. I also learned that she had several major bookings scheduled for the week following my wedding, including a corporate retreat and 2 high-profile social media influencer collaborations that were expected to generate significant content and exposure for her brand. The timing was perfect. By exercising my legitimate control over the utility accounts during that period, I could create a situation where Brana would experience the same type of sudden unexpected disruption to her carefully planned events that she had created for my wedding. The difference was that my actions would be entirely legal and transparent, while hers had involved identity theft and fraud. I would be managing accounts that were legitimately in my name, making decisions about services I was legally responsible for, while she had criminally impersonated me to sabotage arrangements that belonged to someone else. I spent another week carefully documenting the utility account arrangements and researching the proper procedures for making changes to service schedule. I wanted to ensure that everything I did was not only legal but also executed with the same level of precision and attention to detail that Brana had used in her manipulation of my wedding venue. During this time, I also continued building my documentation of the venue incident and the identity theft issues. Richard Voss had been helpful in establishing the legal framework for addressing Brana's actions, and I had filed all the appropriate reports with credit agencies and law enforcement. But I was also learning that the legal system's response to this type of family-related fraud was often slow and uncertain. Even with clear evidence of wrongdoing, prosecution decisions would depend on factors beyond my control, and civil litigation could take months or years to resolve. In contrast, the utility account management was something I could address immediately and directly, with consequences that would be both swift and proportional to the disruption Brana had caused to my wedding plans. As our wedding date approached and the details for our new venue fell into place, I felt a sense of calm satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with preparing appropriate accountability measures for someone who had demonstrated that she felt entitled to manipulate other people's lives without facing consequence. Tyler and I were going to have a beautiful wedding at the Glass Conservatory, surrounded by friends and family who genuinely supported our happiness. And the week after our wedding, Brana was going to learn that actions have consequences, even when those actions are taken against family members who are expected to quietly accept whatever treatment they receive. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. Just as Brana had used her access to my information to sabotage my event, I would use my legitimate control over her business infrastructure to create accountability for her action. But unlike her approach, everything I planned to do would be legal, documented, and entirely within my rights as the account holder. She had crossed ethical and legal lines to harm me. I would stay strictly within legal boundaries, while ensuring that she experienced appropriate consequences for her choices. The beautiful irony was that she had taught me the importance of strategic thinking and careful documentation through her own manipulative behavior. Now I would apply those same skills to address the situation she had created, but I would do it with integrity and legal authority rather than deception and fraud. Our wedding was going to be perfect, and the week afterward would provide Brana with an educational experience about the importance of treating family members with respect and consideration. Sometimes the best teachers are the natural consequences of our own actions, delivered with precision and appropriate timing. The week of our wedding arrived with the crisp October air that makes Portland perfect for fall ceremony. Tyler and I had spent the previous weekend doing final walkthroughs at the Glass Conservatory, and despite the chaos Brana had created, everything was falling into place beautifully. Elena had outdone herself coordinating with our vendors, and the intimate setting was going to provide exactly the romantic atmosphere we had always envisioned. On Tuesday morning, 3 days before the wedding, I received an unexpected call from Madison. Her voice sounded strained and apologetic, which immediately put me on alert given everything that had happened with the venue situation. "Zoe, I hope you don't mind me calling directly. I got your number from the vendor contact sheet that Riverside Manor shared with us. I wanted to talk to you about what happened with your booking." I paused my morning routine, coffee cup halfway to my lips. "What about it, Madison? I've been feeling terrible ever since we signed the contract. Brana told me that you had decided the venue was too expensive, and that you were actually relieved to have an excuse to scale back your plans. She said you had asked her to help facilitate the cancellation because you were too embarrassed to do it directly." The manipulation was even more elaborate than I had realized. Brana hadn't just stolen our venue, she had created an entirely fictional narrative about my supposed financial struggles and emotional state to justify her actions to Madison and probably to herself. "Madison, I never asked Brana to cancel anything. I never spoke to Riverside Manor about financial concerns or wanting to scale back. Someone impersonated me on that phone call, and the person who did it used private information to make the cancellation seem legitimate. The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Madison spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh my God. Zoe, I am so sorry. Brana was so convincing, and she seemed to know so many details about your planning process. She even showed me some of your vendor research and said you had asked her to pass it along to help with my own planning." This revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Brana sabotaged my wedding, but she had also stolen my research and planning work to benefit Madison's event. Months of vendor interviews, price comparisons, and detailed planning had been appropriated and redistributed as if it were Brana's own contribution to her friend's wedding. "Madison, I need you to understand something. Brana didn't have permission to share any of my vendor research or planning documents. That information represented months of work, and she had no right to pass it along to anyone. I didn't know," Madison said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "Zoe, what can I do to make this right? I know we can't undo the venue contract, but is there anything else I can do?" I appreciated Madison's genuine remorse, but I also recognized that she was another victim of Brana's manipulation rather than a willing participant in the sabotage. "Madison, I don't hold you responsible for what happened. You acted on information that you believed was true. But I do need you to understand that Brana deliberately deceived both of us to create this situation." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen processing this new information. The scope of Brana's deception was expanding beyond the venue cancellation to include theft of intellectual property and elaborate lies to multiple parties. She had constructed an entire false reality to justify her actions, and she had done it so convincingly that even Madison, who knew me personally, had believed the story completely. This conversation also confirmed something I had suspected, but hadn't been able to prove. Brana had been planning this sabotage for weeks, or possibly months. The level of preparation required to coach Madison, steal my research and coordinate the venue switch, indicated that this wasn't an impulsive decision, but a calculated campaign, designed to benefit her friend at my expense. I called Richard Voss to update him on this new information. His response was immediate and serious. "Ms. Hartwell, what you've just described adds several additional legal violations to the case: theft of intellectual property, conspiracy to defraud, and potentially racketeering if there's evidence of an ongoing pattern of this type of behavior. We need to document everything Madison told you while it's fresh in your memory." Richard also suggested that Madison might be willing to provide a written statement about her conversations with Brana, which could serve as crucial evidence in any legal proceeding. The fact that she called you voluntarily and expressed remorse suggests she might be cooperative in helping to establish the facts of what happened. That afternoon, I drafted a detailed summary of my conversation with Madison and sent it to Richard for review. I also began preparing what I privately called Project Accountability, the systematic approach I had developed for addressing Brana's actions through legitimate management of the utility account. My research had revealed that Brana had 3 major properties with bookings scheduled for the week following our wedding. The Willamette Heights penthouse was hosting a corporate leadership retreat for a tech startup from Seattle. The Pearl District loft was being used by 2 lifestyle influencers for a collaborative content creation week. The Hawthorne apartment was booked by a travel blogger who was planning to feature Portland's food scene in a series of articles for a major magazine. Each of these bookings was crucial to Brana's business model and reputation. The corporate retreat represented significant revenue and potential repeat business. The influencer collaboration was designed to generate social media exposure that could lead to future booking. The travel blogger's coverage could provide the kind of national publicity that would elevate Brana's properties to a new level of recognition. All 3 properties depended on reliable utilities, high-speed internet, and climate control systems to maintain the luxury experience that justified Brana's premium pricing. Any disruption to these services would not only affect the current guests, but could result in negative reviews, canceled future bookings, and damage to the carefully cultivated brand image that Brana had built around her rental business. The timing was perfect for several reasons. The week after our wedding would give me time to enjoy our honeymoon period without immediate family drama. It would also create a clear connection between Brianna's sabotage of our special day and the consequences she would face for her action. Most importantly, it would occur during a period when she had maximum exposure to reputational and financial damage, ensuring that the accountability measures would have meaningful impact. My plan was straightforward and entirely legal. As the account holder for the utility services, I would exercise my right to modify service schedules and payment arrangements. Specifically, I would request temporary service interruptions for maintenance and upgrades at all 3 properties during the week when Brianna's most important bookings were scheduled. The beauty of this approach was that it required no deception, no identity theft, and no violation of any laws or ethical boundaries. I would be exercising legitimate account management privileges, making decisions about services that were legally in my name, and for which I was financially responsible. I spent Wednesday evening carefully reviewing the utility account terms and conditions to ensure that I understood all of my rights and options as the primary account holder. I also researched the standard procedures for requesting service interruptions and confirmed that account holders could schedule maintenance periods with reasonable notice to the utility companies. Everything was in order for what I had begun thinking of as a masterclass in natural consequence. Brianna had used deception and manipulation to sabotage my wedding because she felt confident that her actions wouldn't result in any meaningful accountability. She was about to learn that confidence was misplaced. Thursday brought the final preparations for our wedding day. Tyler and I had decided to keep the rehearsal dinner small and intimate, with just our immediate families and wedding party. The event was scheduled at a private dining room at one of our favorite restaurants downtown, and despite everything that had happened with the venue, we were both feeling excited and optimistic about the celebration ahead. Brianna arrived at the rehearsal dinner looking polished and confident, wearing a designer dress that I recognized from her recent social media posts about successful property booking. She greeted Tyler and me with enthusiasm that seemed genuine but felt hollow given everything I now knew about her recent actions. "Zoe, you look absolutely radiant," she said, embracing me with what appeared to be sincere affection. "I'm so happy that everything worked out with the new venue. The glass conservatory is going to be absolutely perfect for you and Tyler." The audacity was breathtaking. She was not only pretending that she had played no role in the venue crisis, but was actually positioning herself as supportive of the solution we had been forced to find because of her sabotage. Throughout the dinner, Brianna maintained her performance as the caring, supportive sister. She made a toast about family bonds and shared memories, spoke enthusiastically about the wedding plans, and even offered to help with any last-minute details that needed attention. I watched this performance with a mixture of fascination and disgust. She was so committed to her false narrative that she seemed to have convinced herself that she was genuinely being helpful and supportive. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain this illusion while knowing what she had actually done was remarkable in its psychological complexity. Tyler, who knew everything about Brianna's role in the venue cancellation, maintained polite conversation throughout the evening but later told me that watching her act like a loving sister while knowing the truth made him feel physically sick. "She's not just manipulative," he said as we drove home from the dinner. "She's completely detached from reality. Normal people feel guilt or at least discomfort when they've done something wrong. She seems genuinely convinced that she's been helpful and supportive." Tyler's observation crystallized something I had been struggling to understand about Brianna's behavior. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or competitive jealousy. This was a pattern of behavior that suggested a fundamental inability to acknowledge the impact of her actions on other people, or to take responsibility for the consequences of her choices. Friday morning dawned clear and beautiful. Perfect weather for our wedding day. Tyler and I had decided to spend the morning apart, following the traditional superstition about not seeing each other before the ceremony, so I enjoyed a leisurely breakfast with my bridesmaids, while he went for a run with his groomsmen. The morning was filled with all the pleasant chaos of wedding day preparations: hair and makeup appointments, final dress fittings, coordination calls with vendors, and the general excitement that comes with knowing that months of planning are finally coming together. Elena called around 10 to confirm that everything was set up beautifully at the glass conservatory, and that all of our vendors had arrived and were preparing their respective elements of the celebration. Despite the stressful beginning to our wedding week, everything was proceeding smoothly and professionally. Around noon, I received a text from Kelsey asking if I had a few minutes to talk. She had been working another event and had heard something that she thought I should know about before the wedding. Zoe, I was setting up for a corporate luncheon at the Riverside Manor yesterday, and I overheard Mrs. Reeves on the phone with someone discussing your original booking. She was explaining to whoever she was talking to that she was still uncomfortable about the cancellation call because it hadn't sounded like the same person who had made the original booking. This was interesting information, but I wasn't sure why Kelsey felt it was urgent enough to discuss on my wedding day. Did she say anything specific about what seemed different? Actually, yeah. She mentioned that the original bride had a slight Southern accent from growing up in Georgia, but the person who called to cancel had a distinctly Northwestern speech pattern. She also said the cancellation caller seemed unfamiliar with details that the original bride had been very specific about during the planning process. I felt a chill of recognition. Brianna had never lived anywhere but the Pacific Northwest and had a pronounced Portland accent that would be immediately noticeable to someone who had spent months talking to me about wedding details. Reeves had noticed the difference, but had been convinced to ignore her instincts because of the specific information the caller had provided. Kelsey, did Mrs. Reeves mention anything about being willing to provide a statement about these observations? Actually, she did. She told whoever she was talking to that if there was ever any legal inquiry about the cancellation, she would be happy to share her concerns about the authenticity of that phone call. She seemed genuinely troubled by the whole situation. This information could be crucial for the legal case Richard was building, but more immediately, it provided additional confirmation that my analysis of Brianna's behavior was accurate. She had not only impersonated me but had done it poorly enough that the venue operator had noticed inconsistencies that she had chosen to overlook due to other factors. After thanking Kelsey for the information, I spent a few minutes updating my documentation files with this new evidence. Even on my wedding day, I was continuing to build the comprehensive record that would be essential for addressing Brianna's actions through appropriate legal channels. The afternoon flew by in a blur of final preparations and growing excitement. My bridesmaids were wonderful, keeping me calm and focused while handling all the small details that could have been stressful. Tyler's groomsmen were equally supportive, ensuring that everything on his end was proceeding smoothly. At 4 o'clock, we began the process of getting dressed and making final preparations for the 5:30 ceremony. My dress was even more beautiful than I had remembered, and seeing myself in the full wedding ensemble reminded me of why this day was so important regardless of the obstacles we had overcome to reach it. The glass conservatory looked absolutely magical when we arrived for final photo. Elena and her team had transformed the space into something that exceeded even our highest expectations. The autumn flowers, the warm lighting, and the elegant table settings created an atmosphere that was both romantic and sophisticated. As guests began arriving and taking their seats, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for everyone who had supported us throughout the planning process and the recent crisis. Our friends and family had rallied around us when Brianna's sabotage created challenges, and their presence at the ceremony felt like a celebration of community as much as merit. Tyler looked absolutely handsome in his tuxedo, and when I saw him waiting at the altar, all of the stress and drama of the past few weeks faded into insignificance. This was what mattered: the commitment we were making to each other and the life we were building together. The ceremony itself was perfect. Our officiant was warm and personal, our vows were heartfelt and meaningful, and the setting provided exactly the intimate elegance we had always envisioned. When Tyler and I were pronounced husband and wife, the joy and celebration from our guests created a moment that felt magical and unforgettable. The reception that followed was everything we had hoped it would be. The food was delicious, the music was perfect, and the conversations with friends and family created memories that would last a lifetime. Even Brianna's presence couldn't diminish the happiness and satisfaction of seeing months of planning come together successfully. During the reception, Brianna gave a speech about family bonds and sisterly love that was so disconnected from reality that several guests later commented on how surprising it was given the tension they had sensed during the planning process. But I smiled graciously and accepted her performance for what it was: one final attempt to maintain her false narrative about being a supportive family member. As Tyler and I left the reception that evening as husband and wife, I felt complete satisfaction with how the day had unfolded. We had created the wedding we wanted, despite the obstacles that had been placed in our path, and we had done it with grace, dignity, and the support of people who genuinely cared about our happiness. But as we drove to our hotel for our wedding night, I was also thinking about the week ahead and the accountability measures that would soon provide Brianna with an educational experience about the consequences of manipulating other people's lives. The wedding was over, the honeymoon would be wonderful, and then it would be time for Project Accountability to demonstrate the importance of treating family members with respect and consideration. The next phase of this story was about to begin, and unlike Brianna's approach, everything I planned to do would be legal, transparent, and entirely justified by her own choices and actions. Tyler and I spent our honeymoon weekend at a charming bed and breakfast on the Oregon coast, disconnected from phones and social media, simply enjoying our first days as a married couple. The salt air, long walks on the beach, and quiet evenings by the fireplace provided the perfect transition from the intensity of wedding planning to the peaceful beginning of our married life together. We returned to Portland on Sunday evening refreshed and happy, with Tyler heading back to his hospital rotation on Monday morning, and me planning to ease back into my freelance design work gradually throughout the week. The apartment felt different somehow, more settled and permanent now that we were officially husband and wife, and I spent Monday morning reorganizing my workspace and catching up on emails that had accumulated during our brief absence. Around 10 in the morning, I received a call from Patricia, my mother, her voice carrying the particular tone she used when she was trying to manage family situations without directly addressing underlying tensions. "Zoe, dear, I hope you and Tyler had a wonderful honeymoon. The wedding was absolutely beautiful, and everyone is still talking about how lovely everything looked at the glass conservatory." I thanked her for the compliment while wondering what prompted the call, since my mother rarely contacted me just to offer praise without some underlying agenda or concern she needed to address. I wanted to mention that Brianna has some very important business events happening this week, and she's been working incredibly hard to make sure everything goes perfectly. You know how much her rental property business means to her, and she has some high-profile clients who could really help establish her reputation in the industry. The timing of this conversation was interesting, coming just as I was preparing to implement the accountability measures I had planned for exactly this week. It suggested that Brianna might have sensed potential vulnerability in her business operations, though she almost certainly didn't understand the specific nature of the exposure she faced. "That's nice, Mom. I'm sure Brianna will handle her business responsibilities professionally." Well, I was hoping that if any family issues or tensions came up during this important week, we could all be understanding and support. You know how stressful it can be when you're trying to impress important clients, and I'd hate for any lingering concerns about the wedding planning to create additional pressure for her. The manipulation was subtle but unmistakable. My mother was preemptively asking me to avoid creating problems for Brianna during her crucial business week, without directly acknowledging that Brianna had created significant problems for Tyler and me during our crucial wedding week. "Mom, I think it's important for everyone to take responsibility for their own business relationships and professional reputation. I'm sure Brianna will manage whatever challenges come up during her event." After we hung up, I realized that my mother's call had actually provided useful information about Brianna's state of mind. The fact that she felt the need to recruit parental support for protection during this particular week suggested that she might be more aware of potential vulnerabilities than I had anticipated. I spent Monday afternoon reviewing the utility account information one final time, confirming service schedules and preparing the communications I would need to submit to request the temporary maintenance interruption. Everything was properly documented and legally sound, with clear justification for the account management decisions I was planning to make. The 3 properties had different utility providers, which meant I would need to contact multiple companies to coordinate the service modification. The Willamette Heights penthouse used Portland General Electric and Northwest Natural Gas. The Pearl District loft was serviced by Pacific Power and Columbia River Water. The Hawthorne apartment utilized Portland General Electric and the City Water Bureau. I had researched each company's policies for scheduled maintenance and service interruptions, and all of them allowed primary account holders to request temporary service suspensions with appropriate notice. The maintenance windows I planned to request would last approximately 48 to 72 hours, beginning on Tuesday evening and extending through Friday afternoon. This timing would impact the corporate retreat, the influencer collaboration, and the travel bloggers visit, but it would avoid affecting any weekend guests or longer-term bookings that might involve families or other parties who hadn't chosen to benefit from Brianna's sabotage of my wedding. On Tuesday morning, I began implementing project accountability with a systematic approach that prioritized documentation and professionalism. My first call was to Portland General Electric regarding both the penthouse and the apartment property. The customer service representative was helpful and efficient when I explained that I needed to schedule maintenance-related service interruptions for 2 properties under my account. She confirmed my account holder status, reviewed the service addresses, and asked about the preferred timing for the interruptions. I'd like to request temporary service suspensions beginning this evening around 6 p.m. and continuing through Friday afternoon. These properties are rental units, and we need to perform some electrical system upgrades that require complete power shutdown for safety reasons. That's not a problem, Ms. Hartwell. I can schedule those interruptions for both properties starting at 6 p.m. today. Will you need any special coordination with restoration timing on Friday? Friday afternoon restoration would be perfect. I'll call to confirm when we're ready to resume normal service. The process was remarkably straightforward and professional. As the account holder, I had every right to manage service schedules according to my property maintenance needs, and the utility company was cooperative and accommodating about implementing the changes I requested. My second call was to Pacific Power for the Pearl District loft, where I encountered equally professional service and efficient processing of my maintenance request. The representative confirmed the service suspension timing and provided a reference number for tracking the scheduled interruption. The third call was to Northwest Natural Gas, where I requested a coordinated interruption that would align with the electrical service suspension at the penthouse property. Again, the process was smooth and professional, with the utility company treating my request as a routine property management decision. By noon on Tuesday, I had successfully scheduled coordinated utility interruptions for all 3 of Brianna's most important rental properties, timed to begin just as her high-profile guests were settling in for their respective stay. The beauty of the approach was its complete legitimacy and transparency. I was simply exercising normal account management responsibilities in a way that happened to create educational consequences for someone who had sabotaged my wedding. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk through the Pearl District, partly for exercise and partly out of curiosity about whether I might observe any of the preparation activities for the influencer collaboration that was supposed to begin that evening. The loft building was an elegant converted warehouse with large windows and modern fixtures that photographed beautifully for social media content. As I walked past the building around 3 o'clock, I noticed a significant amount of activity in the lobby area. Professional photography equipment was being moved through the entrance, and several people who appeared to be content creators were discussing setup logistics with someone who looked like a building manager. The scene reminded me of the careful coordination and advanced planning that had gone into my own wedding, and I felt a momentary pang of sympathy for the people who were about to have their carefully planned event disrupted by utility issues. But then I reminded myself that these particular guests were benefiting from arrangements that had been made possible by sabotaging my own special event, and that the disruption they would experience was a direct consequence of Brianna's deliberate actions rather than random misfortune. Around 4 o'clock, I received a text message from Brianna that immediately caught my attention. "Hey sis, thanks again for such a beautiful wedding. I'm starting a huge week for my business and feeling so grateful for family support. Hope you and Tyler are settling into married life happily." The timing of this message, coming just hours before the utility interruptions were scheduled to begin, suggested that Brianna might be feeling some intuitive anxiety about her business vulnerability, though she clearly didn't understand the specific nature of the challenge she was about to face. I responded with polite but neutral acknowledgement. "Thanks, Brianna. Hope your business events go well." At exactly 6 o'clock that evening, the utility interruptions commenced according to the schedules I had arranged. I was sitting in my apartment with a cup of tea, reading a book and listening to the October rain against the windows, when I imagined the lights going out in 3 luxury rental properties across Portland. The corporate retreat at the Willamette Heights penthouse would be discovering that their evening welcome reception was suddenly taking place by candlelight, if any candles were available. The high-tech presentation equipment they had planned to use for team-building exercises would be completely inoperable, and the climate control systems that maintained the comfortable environment would be offline indefinitely. The influencer collaboration at the Pearl District loft would be finding that their professional lighting equipment was useless, their ability to charge cameras and phones was eliminated, and the modern kitchen appliances they had planned to feature in cooking content were completely non-functional. More importantly, their ability to upload content, maintain their social media presence, or even communicate with their audiences would be severely compromised. The travel blogger at the Hawthorne apartment would be discovering that his plans to showcase Portland's food scene through beautifully lit photography and detailed written reviews were substantially complicated by the lack of electricity for lighting, cooking, or electronic devices. I felt no vindictive pleasure in imagining these disruptions, but I did feel a deep satisfaction in knowing that natural consequences were finally being applied to someone who had felt entitled to sabotage other people's important events without facing any accountability for her actions. Around 8 o'clock, my phone began buzzing with what would become a steady stream of communications from Brianna. The first message was a phone call that I allowed to go to voicemail, followed immediately by a text message that captured the beginning of her realization that something significant was wrong. "Zoe, I'm having some kind of utility emergency at all 3 properties tonight. The power is out everywhere, and the utility companies are saying it's scheduled maintenance, but I never got any notice about this. Do you know anything about maintenance schedules for the accounts?" I waited several hours before responding, partly because I wanted her to fully experience the stress and uncertainty that comes with having important events suddenly derailed by circumstances beyond your control, and partly because I wanted to craft a response that was truthful but not immediately revealing of my role in creating the situation. "Sorry to hear about the utility issue. I'm not aware of any maintenance schedules, but you should probably contact the utility companies directly to get information about restoration timing." This response was completely accurate. I wasn't aware of any maintenance schedules other than the ones I had specifically requested, and contacting the utility companies directly was indeed the appropriate way for her to get information about restoration time. Wednesday morning brought increasingly frantic communications from Brianna, as the full scope of the utility disruptions became clear. The corporate retreat had been forced to relocate to a hotel conference room, with significant additional expenses and logistical complications that reflected poorly on Brianna's property management capability. The influencer collaboration had been postponed indefinitely, with the content creators expressing frustration about the unprofessional circumstances and unreliable infrastructure. The travel blogger had checked out early and left negative feedback about the property's inability to provide basic amenity. Brianna's text messages throughout the day revealed her growing desperation and confusion. "The utility companies keep saying this is legitimate scheduled maintenance, but I swear I never received any advance notice. This is destroying my reputation and costing me thousands of dollars in refunds and relocation expenses." By Wednesday afternoon, she had apparently exhausted her patience with utility company customer service representatives and was seeking help from family members to understand what was happening. My mother called me around 3 o'clock with a level of stress in her voice that I had rarely heard. "Zoe, Brianna is having some kind of crisis with her rental properties. All the utilities have been shut off at the same time, and she's convinced that someone has made a mistake or that there's been some kind of system error. She's beside herself because these bookings were supposed to establish her business with some very important clients. That sounds very stressful for her. Has she been able to get any information from the utility companies about when service might be restored? She says they keep telling her it's scheduled maintenance that could last several more days, but she's certain she never received any advance notice about maintenance being planned. She's wondering if there might have been some kind of communication breakdown with the account manager." This was the opening I had been waiting for, the moment when the family would learn about the utility account arrangements and my legitimate role in managing those services. "Mom, I think there might be some confusion about the account management structure." When Brianna first started her rental business, she asked me to help her set up utility accounts because her credit wasn't strong enough to get approved for commercial service. Most of those accounts are still in my name, with Brianna listed as an authorized user for day-to-day management. The silence on the other end of the line was substantial. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice carefully controlled. Are you saying that you're the primary account holder for the utilities at Brianna's rental properties? That's correct. I helped her get started in her business by lending my credit and account management credentials, and we never changed the account structure as her business developed. And did you request any maintenance or service interruptions for this week? As the account holder, I have the right to schedule maintenance and service modifications as needed. I requested temporary service suspensions to perform some property assessments and system evaluations. Another long silence. Zoe, you understand that this is happening during the most important week of Brianna's business year? Yes, I understand the timing. Just like Brianna understood the timing when she sabotaged our wedding 3 weeks before the ceremony. This was the moment when the connection between Brianna's actions and the current consequences became explicit. My mother could no longer pretend that family tensions were abstract or that actions didn't have natural repercussions. Honey, I think there might be some misunderstanding about what happened with your wedding venue. Brianna was trying to help when she thought you were having financial concerns. Mom, we've been through this. Brianna impersonated me, canceled our venue, and gave our date to her friend. She also stole months of my vendor research and planning work to benefit Madison's wedding. These aren't misunderstandings, they're deliberate actions that had serious consequences for Tyler and me. But surely you can see that shutting off utilities during Brianna's most important business week is an extreme response to family disagreements. I can see that experiencing sudden, unexpected disruption to carefully planned events is stressful and costly. Tyler and I experienced exactly the same thing when Brianna canceled our venue, except what she did was illegal identity theft while what I'm doing is legitimate account management. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with my mother attempting various approaches to convince me to restore utility services immediately. She tried appeals to family loyalties, suggestions that I was being vindictive, and offers to mediate family discussions about the wedding venue situation. But I remained firm in my position that the utility interruptions were legitimate property management decisions that I was entitled to make as the account holder, and that the timing was a natural consequence of Brianna's own choices about when to sabotage other people's important events. After we hung up, I felt a profound sense of clarity about the family dynamics that had allowed Brianna's manipulative behavior to continue unchecked for so many years. The same people who had minimized and excused her sabotage of my wedding were now demanding immediate action to protect her from the consequences of her own actions. Wednesday evening brought the most desperate communication yet from Brianna herself. She called around 9 o'clock, her voice cracking with stress and exhaustion. Zoe, Mom told me about the utility accounts. I didn't realize they were still in your name, and I certainly didn't know you were planning maintenance this week. Is there any way we can postpone the service interruptions until after my bookings are finished? I'll pay for any additional costs or inconvenience. The conversation was interesting because it represented the first time Brianna had directly acknowledged my control over the situation, though she was still framing it as an unfortunate coincidence rather than a deliberate consequence of her own action.
Brianna, the maintenance schedule has already been coordinated with multiple utility providers, and changing it now would be complicated and expensive. I planned these service interruptions for this particular week because it seemed like an appropriate time for property assessments, but you know how important this week is for my business. Couldn't you have chosen literally any other week for maintenance? You knew how important our wedding was to Tyler and me. Couldn't you have chosen literally any other weekend to cancel our venue and give our date to Madison? This parallel finally forced her to confront the connection between her actions and the current situation, though her response revealed the same inability to accept responsibility that had characterized her behavior throughout our relationship. That's completely different. I thought I was helping with your financial situation, and I had no idea you would react this way to what I believed was a favor. Brianna, you impersonated me, stole our venue and gave it to your friend. You also stole months of my planning work and research. None of that was helping me. It was helping Madison at my expense. I was trying to prevent you from getting in over your head financially. The venue was expensive, and I thought you would be relieved to have an excuse to choose something more affordable. If you had concerns about my finances, you could have spoken to me directly instead of impersonating me and sabotaging arrangements that Tyler and I had worked months to create. The conversation continued in circles, with Brianna unable to acknowledge the intentional nature of her sabotage, and me unwilling to accept her reframed narrative about protective intervention. Eventually, she hung up in frustration, but not before making it clear that she expected family pressure to force me to restore utilities immediately. Thursday brought the escalation I had anticipated, with coordinated calls from both parents in what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated family intervention, designed to pressure me into reversing the utility interruption. My father called first, using his characteristic approach of reasonable-sounding logic, mixed with subtle emotional manipulation. "Zoe, I understand you're upset about the wedding venue situation, but I think the utility issue has gone beyond proportional risk. Brianna's business could be permanently damaged by negative reviews and contract penalties. And that seems like a very serious consequence for what was essentially a family miscommunication." "Dad, it wasn't a miscommunication. Brianna committed identity theft and fraud to sabotage our wedding and benefit her friend. The consequences she's experiencing now are natural results of her own choices. But you're in a position to end this situation immediately by restoring the utility. Continuing to let her business suffer when you have the power to stop it seems unnecessarily harsh." This conversation revealed the fundamental family dynamic that had enabled Brianna's behavior, the expectation that I would always be the one to sacrifice my own interests to maintain family harmony, even when other family members had created the conflict through their own inappropriate action. My mother called an hour later with a more emotional approach, emphasizing family bonds and shared history while minimizing the significance of Brianna's action. "Honey, I know you feel hurt about the venue situation, but Brianna is your sister, and she's facing real financial and professional consequences. This could destroy the business she's worked so hard to build, and I can't believe you want to see your own sister's career ruined over a wedding venue." "Mom." Brianna didn't seem concerned about destroying months of Tyler's and my planning when she decided to cancel our venue and steal our date. Why should I be more concerned about protecting her business than she was about protecting our wedding? Because that's what families do. We support each other even when we've made mistakes or had misunderstandings. Families also respect each other enough not to commit identity theft and fraud against family members. Brianna crossed serious legal and ethical lines, and she did it deliberately to benefit her friend at our expense. Thursday afternoon brought the most interesting development yet, a call from Madison Chen, who had apparently been recruited by Brianna to advocate for utility restoration. "Zoe, I hope you don't mind me calling again. Brianna told me about the utility situation with her rental properties, and I feel terrible that my wedding might have contributed to family tensions that are now affecting her business." Madison's call revealed that Brianna had constructed yet another false narrative, this time positioning the utility interruptions as family drama indirectly related to the venue's situation, rather than direct accountability for her own action. "Madison, the utility situation isn't related to family tensions. It's related to Brianna's decision to use my credit and account management services for her business while simultaneously using my identity to commit fraud against me. I had no idea the account arrangements were so complicated." Brianna made it sound like there was some kind of billing error or system malfunction that was causing problems during an unfortunate week. "There's no billing error or malfunction. I'm the primary account holder for utilities at her rental properties, and I've requested temporary service interruptions to perform property assessments. The timing corresponds to the week after she sabotaged our wedding." Madison was quiet for a long moment. "Zoe, I want you to know that I had no idea about any of the financial or account arrangements when Brianna helped me get the Riverside Manor booking. If I had understood that she was using your accounts or your identity to create opportunities for my wedding, I never would have accepted her help." "I believe you, Madison. You were manipulated just like Tyler and I were, and like our parents continue to be. The difference is that you're willing to acknowledge the truth when you learn about it." After this conversation, I felt even more confident that the accountability measures I had implemented were appropriate and necessary. Brianna was continuing to manipulate family members and friends with false narratives designed to generate support for her position while avoiding responsibility for her own actions. Thursday evening brought a final desperate call from Brianna, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and stress. "Zoe, please. My business is being destroyed, and these clients are never going to work with me again." The corporate retreat had to relocate to a hotel. The influencers are posting negative content about unreliable Portland accommodations, and the travel blogger is writing a scathing review about infrastructure failures in luxury rentals. That sounds very stressful. It must be similar to how Tyler and I felt when we discovered our wedding venue had been canceled 3 weeks before the ceremony. I get it, okay? I understand you're angry about the venue situation, but can't we separate personal family issues from business consequences that could affect my entire future? Brianna, you didn't separate personal family issues from our wedding when you decided to sabotage our venue and give our date to Madison. You made business decisions about my vendor research and wedding planning work when you stole months of my efforts to benefit your friend. Fine, I made mistakes with the venue situation. I should have handled it differently, but please don't let my business be destroyed because of family drama. This was the closest Brianna had come to acknowledging wrongdoing, though she was still framing her actions as mistakes and family drama rather than deliberate fraud and sabotage. Brianna, the utility interruptions will be restored Friday afternoon, according to the maintenance schedule I arranged. Your weekend bookings and future clients won't be affected, but the consequences you've experienced this week are natural results of the choices you made about how to treat family members. So this was deliberate. You planned this to happen during my most important business week. I planned it to happen during the week after you sabotaged our wedding. Yes, just like you planned your venue cancellation to happen 3 weeks before our ceremony, when it would cause maximum disruption and stress. Friday morning brought blessed silence from my phone. No desperate calls from Brianna, no intervention attempts from parents, no pressure from well-meaning friends who had been recruited to advocate for family harmony over accountability. I spent the morning working on client projects and enjoying the peaceful routine of normal married life with Tyler. Around noon, I called the utility companies to confirm that service restoration would proceed as scheduled that afternoon. The customer service representatives were professional and efficient, treating the restoration request as a routine conclusion to planned maintenance activities. By 4 o'clock Friday afternoon, electricity, gas, and water services had been restored to all 3 of Brianna's rental properties. The week of accountability was complete, and the educational experience about natural consequences had been delivered with precision timing and complete legal authority. Brianna had learned that actions have repercussions, even when those actions are taken against family members who are expected to quietly accept whatever treatment they receive. More importantly, the entire family had learned that I was no longer willing to absorb the consequences of other people's manipulative behavior while protecting them from the natural results of their own choices. The weekend following the utility restoration brought an unexpected period of silence from Brianna and my parents. After a week of desperate phone calls and family intervention attempts, the sudden absence of communication felt almost surreal. Tyler and I spent Saturday morning hiking in Forest Park, enjoying the crisp autumn weather and the simple pleasure of being newlyweds without the drama that had dominated our recent week. On Sunday afternoon, I received a single text message from Brianna that was unlike any communication I had ever received from her. Zoe, I need to apologize. Can we talk when you're ready? The message was striking in its brevity and directness. No elaborate explanations, no attempts at justification, no requests for immediate forgiveness. Just an acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a respectful request for conversation when I was prepared to engage. I showed the message to Tyler, who raised his eyebrows in surprise. That's the first time I've ever seen her take responsibility for anything without trying to explain it away or blame circumstances. I waited until Tuesday to respond, partly because I wanted time to process the events of the previous week and partly because I felt no urgency to immediately accommodate Brianna's desire for conversation, after she had shown no consideration for my timeline when sabotaging our wedding. Brianna, I'm willing to talk, but I need you to understand that this conversation needs to be about accountability, not damage control for your business reputation. She responded within minutes. I understand, whatever consequences come from this week, I deserve them. I just want to try to make things right between us, if that's possible. We agreed to meet on Thursday evening at a neutral location downtown, a quiet coffee shop that stayed open late and provided enough privacy for a serious conversation without the emotional weight of family locations or personal spaces. When I arrived, Brianna was already seated at a corner table, looking genuinely exhausted in a way that seemed deeper than just business stress. She had always been meticulously put together, but tonight her appearance suggested someone who had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," she said as I sat down. "I know I don't deserve your time or consideration after what I did." This opening was dramatically different from her previous attempts to minimize or reframe her actions. There were no qualifications, no suggestions that her intentions had been misunderstood, no attempts to position herself as a victim of circumstance. "Brianna, before we go any further, I need you to acknowledge specifically what you did, not your interpretation of events or your intentions, but the actual actions you took." She took a deep breath and met my eyes direct. "I impersonated you on a phone call to Riverside Manor and convinced them to cancel your wedding venue booking. I then arranged for Madison to take your date, which benefited my friend at your expense. I also shared your vendor research and planning documents with Madison without your permission, essentially stealing months of your work to help her wedding planning." The clarity and directness of this acknowledgement was startling. For the first time in our adult relationship, Brianna was taking full responsibility for her actions without attempting to soften them through explanations or justifications. "And why did you do those things?" "Because I was jealous of your relationship with Tyler and resentful that you were having the kind of wedding I wanted but couldn't afford. I told myself I was protecting you from financial stress, but that was a lie I created to justify sabotaging something beautiful because I couldn't handle my own envy." This level of self-awareness and honesty was completely unprecedented. Brianna had not only acknowledged her actions, but had accurately identified the emotional motivations behind them, including the self-deception she had used to justify her behavior. "What made you realize this? Because last week you were still claiming you thought you were helping." "The utility situation forced me to experience what you and Tyler went through when I canceled your venue. Having my carefully planned events suddenly destroyed by circumstances I couldn't control made me understand the cruelty of what I had done to your wedding." She paused, seeming to gather courage for what came next. "But more than that, watching how you handled the accountability made me realize how different we are. You used legitimate authority to create natural consequences for my actions. I used deception and fraud to sabotage your happiness." The contrast made it impossible to keep lying to myself about who I had become. This conversation was revealing a depth of reflection and personal growth that I hadn't expected from Brianna. The week of consequences had apparently triggered genuine self-examination rather than just resentment or self-pity. "What do you want from this conversation, Brianna?" "I want to apologize sincerely for the pain and stress I caused you and Tyler. I want to acknowledge that I violated your trust in ways that may be irreparable, and I want to ask what I can do to begin making amends, understanding that you may decide that's not possible or desirable." The humility in her voice was genuine, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to a version of my sister who was capable of actual growth and change. "Brianna, I appreciate this apology and I believe it's sincere, but I need you to understand that rebuilding trust will require consistent changes in behavior over time, not just words in a single conversation." "I understand. I've already started making some changes that I hope will demonstrate my commitment to being a better person and a better sister." She explained that she had contacted Madison to provide a full and honest account of how she had manipulated the venue situation, including her theft of my research and planning work. She had also reached out to Miss Reeves at Riverside Manor to clarify that the cancellation call had been fraudulent impersonation, though she understood that this wouldn't reverse the booking situation. More significantly, she had begun working with a therapist to address the competitive jealousy and manipulative behavior patterns that had damaged her relationships with family members and friends. She had also consulted with an attorney about the legal implications of her actions, and was prepared to cooperate fully with any identity theft or fraud investigations that might result from my reports to law enforcement. "I know these steps don't undo the harm I caused, but I hope they show that I'm serious about changing the behaviors that led to this situation." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, with Brianna answering my questions honestly and directly without defensiveness or attempts to minimize her responsibility. She acknowledged the broader pattern of manipulative behavior throughout our relationship and expressed genuine remorse for the years of competitive undermining that had preceded the wedding venue sabotage. When we finally prepared to leave, Brianna made one final request. "Zoe, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but I hope that someday we might be able to rebuild a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. I understand if that's not possible, but I wanted you to know that I'm committed to becoming someone worthy of that possibility. I told her that I appreciated her efforts and that I would be watching for consistent changes in behavior over time. I made no promises about the future of our relationship, but I acknowledged that her willingness to take responsibility and seek professional help was a meaningful beginning. Over the following months, Brianna demonstrated remarkable consistency in following through on her commitments to personal growth and behavior change. She maintained regular therapy appointments and made visible efforts to address the competitive dynamics that had poisoned our relationship for so many years. She also faced the professional consequences of her actions with dignity and accountability. Several potential clients chose not to work with her after learning about the utility disruptions and the circumstances that had led to them. Her online reputation required months of careful rebuilding, and her rental business never quite returned to its previous level of success. But rather than blaming me for these consequences or seeking family intervention to restore her business relationship, Brianna accepted responsibility for the choices that had led to her professional difficulties and worked steadily to rebuild her reputation through improved service and ethical business practices. Tyler and I watched these changes with cautious optimism. We maintained appropriate boundaries while acknowledging the genuine efforts Brianna was making to address the issues that had led to her sabotage of our wedding. The legal aspects of the identity theft case proceeded slowly through the system, with Brianna's cooperation helping to establish a clear record of what had occurred. Ultimately, the district attorney's office decided not to pursue criminal charges, partly because of Brianna's cooperation and partly because the family relationship complicated the prosecution decision. However, the documentation we had built proved valuable in other ways. Richard Voss helped me establish a comprehensive fraud alert system that would protect against future identity misuse, and the case became part of a broader effort to help venues and vendors develop better verification procedures for booking change. 6 months after our wedding, Tyler and I received an unexpected package in the mail. Inside was a beautifully crafted photo album containing professional images from our glass conservatory ceremony and reception, along with a handwritten note from Brianna. Zoe and Tyler, I know I can never undo the stress and pain I caused during your wedding planning, but I wanted you to have something beautiful that celebrates the day you actually had rather than the crisis I created. The wedding was gorgeous, and your happiness was evident to everyone who was there. I'm sorry it took me so long to see past my own issues and appreciate the love you share. With genuine affection and respect, Brianna. The photo album was a thoughtful and appropriate gesture that acknowledged the harm she had caused while focusing on celebrating what Tyler and I had ultimately achieved. It represented the kind of considerate action that built trust incrementally rather than demanding immediate forgiveness. A year after our wedding, Brianna and I had developed a cautiously positive relationship based on honest communication and realistic boundaries. She had maintained her therapy commitments and demonstrated consistent changes in how she handled competitive feelings and family dynamics. More importantly, she had learned to take responsibility for her actions without requiring external pressure or consequences to motivate accountability. The personal growth that had emerged from the utility situation crisis had apparently created lasting changes in her character and behavior pattern. Tyler and I celebrated our first wedding anniversary with a small dinner party at our apartment, including close friends and family members who had supported us throughout the venue crisis and beyond. Brianna was invited and attended, contributing to the celebration without attempting to make herself the center of attention or create drama around past issues. During the dinner, our friend Kelsey pulled me aside to comment on how different the family dynamic seemed compared to previous gatherings. I don't know what happened between you and Brianna after your wedding, but whatever it was seems to have helped her grow up considerably. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that the utility consequences had served their intended purpose, not through punishment, but through education. Brianna had needed to experience the disruption and stress that her actions created for other people before she could develop genuine empathy and accountability. The week when her business events collapsed had been difficult for everyone involved, but it had also created an opportunity for personal growth that might not have occurred through conversation or family intervention alone. Sometimes people need to experience the natural consequences of their behavior before they can understand the impact of their choices on others. Tyler and I built a strong and happy marriage founded on mutual respect and honest communication. The crisis that Brianna created during our wedding planning ultimately strengthened our relationship by showing us how we could work together to solve problems and support each other through unexpected challenges. And while the road to rebuilding trust with Brianna was long and required ongoing vigilance, the foundation of accountability and honesty that emerged from that difficult period created the possibility for a healthier family relationship than any of us had experienced before. The most important lesson from the entire experience was that protecting yourself from manipulative behavior doesn't require becoming manipulative yourself. By responding to Brianna's illegal and unethical actions with legal and transparent accountability measures, I had maintained my integrity while still ensuring that appropriate consequences followed inappropriate behavior. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't revenge, but rather the calm application of natural consequences, delivered with precision, timing, and complete legal authority. In the end, accountability served everyone's best interests, including the person who most needed to learn from it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.